He didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man who had simply forgotten the war was over. In 1994, a lone hiker near Willoughby Run spotted a soldier leaning against a white oak, calmly biting the end off a paper cartridge. Thinking it was a dedicated reenactor, the hiker called out a greeting. The soldier looked up, and that's when the hiker realized the reenactor was translucent. Behind the soldier's ribs, you could see the sunlight hitting the creek. But this isn't just another ghost story. This is the story of the 24th Michigan, the men who walked into a meat grinder on a hot July morning and never walked out. Today, we go beyond the veil to discover why the Iron Brigade refuses to leave McPherson's Ridge. Even before the smoke cleared over Gettysburg, the Iron Brigade was a name spoken with respect by friend and foe alike. This wasn't a unit of conscripts or untested boys. It was made up of the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Wisconsin, the 19th Indiana, and the 24th Michigan, all volunteers. These were men from the farms, logging camps, and growing cities of the West, and they had already proven themselves on some of the war's most brutal battlefields. They earned their nickname, the Iron Brigade, from their own commanding general after he watched them stand like a wall of iron under ferocious fire. Their look was just as formidable as their reputation. While most Union soldiers wore standard-issue blue kepis, the men of the Iron Brigade wore the tall black felt hardy hat of the regular army. To this day, people walking through Herbst Woods at dusk report seeing shadows moving between trees, wearing those same distinctive black hats. When Confederate troops saw those hats coming, they knew they were in for a serious fight. After one brutal engagement, a captured Confederate soldier reportedly said he was tired of fighting those black-hatted fellows. Leading them into Pennsylvania was Brigadier General Solomon Meredith, a man who looked every bit the part of a warrior giant. Standing an imposing 6'7", this Quaker from Indiana was nicknamed Long Saul. He was a politician before the war with no formal military training, but his fierce devotion to the Union inspired his men. Under his command, the Iron Brigade became the tip of the spear for the Union Army's 1st Corps, the elite shock troops called in for the most desperate moments. Their reputation walked ahead of them, a living symbol of Northern resolve. But they were about to learn that a reputation offers very little protection from a storm of lead. The journey to Gettysburg was an ordeal in itself. In late June 1863, they broke camp and began a grueling forced march north out of Virginia. The summer was unforgiving. One day it was choking dust, the next it was torrential downpours that turned roads into muddy swamps. They pushed on day after day, sometimes covering 25 miles under a blistering sun. On June 25th, they crossed the Potomac River, leaving the war-torn landscape of Virginia for Maryland. The march was relentless, taking them over the Catoctin Mountains and through towns where people watched with a mix of hope and fear. These weren't parade ground soldiers. They were lean, weathered men, their uniforms stained with the sweat and mud of a 100-mile trek. Their boots were shot, their bodies ached, but their discipline never broke. On June 30th, as a steady rain fell, the Iron Brigade led their division across the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania. The air was thick with tension, with constant rumors of Confederate movements. They stopped for a bit near a stream called Marsh Creek to muster for pay, a strange, brief moment of military routine right before a historic collision. That night, as they tried to rest in the damp fields, few could have known they were only a few miles from the place where their destiny would be decided and where their reputation would be paid for in blood. The long march was almost over. The final, brutal steps would be taken at a dead run, straight towards the sound of cannons. The morning of July 1st, 1863, started with an unnerving calm, but it didn't last. Soon the sound of distant artillery rolled across the hills. Union cavalry under General John Buford had run into the front of the Confederate Army just west of Gettysburg. Buford had chosen his ground well, using a series of ridges to buy the Union Army precious time, but he knew his dismounted troopers couldn't hold out forever. He needed the First Corps. He needed the Iron Brigade. Hearing the cannons, the Black Hats picked up the pace, marching hard up the Emmitsburg Road. The nearly 1,900 men of the brigade swung into the fields near the Lutheran Seminary, the urgency of the moment hanging in the air. Major General John Reynolds, the beloved and dynamic commander of the First Corps, rode out to meet them. Reynolds knew he had to hold the high ground and stop the Confederates before they could build any momentum. There was no time for elaborate plans or stirring speeches. Pointing toward a stretch of woods on McPherson Ridge, Reynolds shouted the order that would launch the Iron Brigade into history. "Forward, for God's sake, and drive those fellows out of those woods." Modern visitors often describe a strange acoustic anomaly here, a silent volley. They report a sudden heavy silence where bird calls stop, followed by the faint, disembodied commands of officers trying to rally their men. Is it the imprint of Reynolds' final order, still echoing through the oaks? It was a raw, desperate command for a desperate moment. Without even pausing to load their rifles, the men of the 24th Michigan were sent forward at the double quick. They moved with a disciplined fury, crashing across the fields and into the trees. The Battle of Gettysburg had begun, and the Iron Brigade was about to walk straight into a meat grinder. The woods west of the seminary, known as Herbst Woods, would be forever defined by the blood of the Iron Brigade. As they charged in, they slammed into the veteran Confederate brigade of General James Archer. The Confederates were stunned to see the black hats of their old rivals emerging from the smoke. The fight exploded at close range, a brutal, swirling melee under the oak trees. The initial Union charge was unstoppable. The Westerners shattered Archer's line and, in the chaos, managed to surround and capture General Archer himself, the first of Robert E. Lee's generals to be captured in the war. It was a huge victory, but it was short-lived. The cost of that initial success was staggering. General Reynolds, the man who had ordered them forward, was struck and killed almost instantly at the edge of the woods, one of the first and highest-ranking casualties of the entire battle. With Reynolds gone, the situation started to unravel. More and more Confederate units were being thrown into the fight, and the Iron Brigade found itself taking fire from the front and the sides. The woods became a slaughterhouse. A soldier from the 19th Indiana put it plainly: "Deadly missiles mowed us down like wheat before the sickle." This wasn't a battle of distant, calculated volleys. It was a desperate, personal fight for survival. Men fought from behind trees and rocks, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and the screams of the wounded. The brigade held its ground with a tenacity that was almost superhuman, but they were being systematically destroyed. Facing them was the 26th North Carolina, a massive regiment that would suffer its own horrific losses trying to break the Union line. Historians and park rangers have noted something that defies easy explanation. On still summer mornings in Herbst Woods, visitors report the smell of gunpowder drifting between the oaks, thick, acrid, unmistakable. No campfire nearby, no scheduled demonstration, no source. It comes and goes in seconds. That's the thing about Herbst Woods. The battle ended here, but the evidence of it never quite did. The ground was littered with blue and gray, and the Iron Brigade was holding the line, but that line was shrinking with every passing minute. In the chaos of Herbst Woods, no one was safe, not even the towering commander of the Iron Brigade. Long Saul Meredith was everywhere, his massive frame a rallying point for his men. He was the very picture of their iron will, a giant leading a brigade of titans. Through the worst of it, Meredith was a fixed point. Men who survived described him riding directly into the line of fire to steady a wavering company. His massive frame impossible to miss, impossible to hide behind. He didn't command from a safe distance. He placed his body between his men and the storm. For a man with no formal military training, he understood something instinctive, that troops under that kind of fire need to see someone who refuses to flinch. But as the brigade began a fighting withdrawal from the woods, disaster struck. A Confederate shell exploded nearby. A piece of shrapnel tore into Meredith's head, fracturing his skull. In the same blast, his horse was killed and collapsed on top of him, crushing his leg and ribs. The giant had fallen. Unconscious and grievously wounded, Meredith was carried from the field. He would survive, but his fighting career was over, ended in a single, violent moment. Battlefield guides have noted a persistent cold spot near the southern edge of Herbst Woods, roughly where Meredith went down. Not a chill from shade, not a shift in the breeze. A sudden, localized drop in temperature felt in the middle of July. Visitors describe it as stepping through an invisible wall. It's there, then it's gone. Gettysburg does that. Command of the shattered brigade passed to Colonel William Robinson of the 7th Wisconsin. The loss of Meredith was a devastating blow. The men had just watched their seemingly invincible leader get struck down. And yet, with their commander gone and their ranks being torn apart, the fight wasn't over. The spirit of the Iron Brigade wasn't in just one man. It was in the collective will of every soldier still standing. That will was about to be tested in the most extreme way imaginable, as the fight became focused on a simple piece of cloth, the regimental flag. In the Civil War, a regiment's flag was its soul. It was the rally point in the chaos, a symbol of honor, a sacred trust. To lose your colors was the ultimate disgrace. For the 24th Michigan, just holding onto their flag against the relentless Confederate assaults became an epic struggle of defiance. The color guard of the 24th Michigan became a magnet for Confederate bullets. The first color bearer was shot down. The flag was snatched up by another man, who was also hit. Again and again, as one soldier fell, another would step forward to take his place, holding the silk banner high as a beacon of resistance. This desperate struggle for the flag became the stuff of legend. At one point, the regimental commander, Colonel Henry Morrow, seized the fallen banner himself to rally his dwindling men. Seeing his commander exposed, a private named William Kelly rushed to his side, took the flag, and declared, "The colonel of the 24th shall never carry the flag while I am alive." He was killed almost instantly. This grim, heroic cycle just kept repeating. The flag was the heart of the regiment, and the men of the 24th Michigan were determined to protect it, even if it cost every last one of them their lives. Shadowy flag bearers have been reported near the 24th Michigan monument, standing at a permanent present arms. The flag was the heart of the regiment, and it seems the men are determined to protect it even in death. Their discipline held firm even as their world fell apart. By late afternoon, the Iron Brigade had been bled dry. The overwhelming numbers of the Confederate assault were finally too much. The Union line, anchored for hours by the men in black hats, started to crumble. Flanked on both sides and with ammunition running dangerously low, the order was finally given to withdraw from the ridge they had paid for with so many lives. For the 24th Michigan, which had been in some of the most intense fighting, the retreat was a desperate affair. Their ranks had been shredded. Of the nearly 500 men who charged into the woods that morning, only a handful remained. But even then, their defiance flared up one last time. In one of the most legendary moments of the day, a tiny remnant of the once proud regiment made a final futile stand. Behind a makeshift barricade of fence rails near the seminary, a small group of survivors from the 24th Michigan turned to face the oncoming Confederates. There were maybe 14 of them left, a few exhausted, powder-stained men representing what was left of their regiment. For a few moments, this tiny band of brothers held their ground, firing their last rounds into the advancing enemy. It was an act of pure, stubborn courage. They weren't fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting for honor, for time, and for the memory of the hundreds of comrades who now lay silent in the woods behind them. What happened to those 14 men is lost to the chaos of that afternoon. Confederate forces swept around the seminary. The Union line was already gone. At most, 3 are documented as reaching Cemetery Hill. The rest vanish from the records, killed, captured, or simply unaccounted for, the way men often are when the army tasked with counting them is itself being destroyed. Their names are on the 24th Michigan Monument. Their fates are not. History got there too late. This brings us back to our Sentinel. These tales suggest that for some of these men, the order to hold at all costs became a permanent command. They weren't unwilling to yield the ground in life, and they refused to yield it in death. The retreat through Gettysburg was a nightmare. The entire Union First Corps was collapsing, scrambling to reach the high ground of Cemetery Hill. For many units, it devolved into a panicked rout, with soldiers abandoning their gear as Confederate sharpshooters fired on them from houses and alleyways. But even in this chaos, the remnants of the Iron Brigade stood out. Though they had suffered more than almost anyone, they kept a semblance of order. They fell back stubbornly, turning to fire at their pursuers. They weren't routing. They were conducting a fighting withdrawal, a final act of professional pride in the face of total disaster. Their discipline held firm even as their world fell apart. Today, visitors who walk the old retreat route from Seminary Ridge towards Cemetery Hill describe something they can't quite categorize: a sense of being followed, footsteps on the gravel path that stop when they stop. Shadows at the edge of their vision, moving between houses and alleyways, exactly as soldiers once did. One tour guide documented 12 separate accounts in a single season. None of the witnesses knew each other. None of them were looking for a ghost story. They were just walking the road the Iron Brigade walked, and whatever is still on that road walked with them. Finally, the exhausted survivors reached the rally point on Cemetery Hill. Out of the approximately 1,883 men who marched into battle that morning, only about 690 were left. They joined other shattered units to form a new defensive line, their black hats a grim sight among the cannons. The Iron Brigade's job on July 1st was over. They had been effectively destroyed as a fighting force in a single afternoon. And though they would participate in later parts of the battle, their heroic, bloody stand west of Gettysburg was their defining moment, and their end. When the sun set on July 1st, 1863, the fields west of Gettysburg were a landscape of absolute carnage. The Iron Brigade, the pride of the Army, had been sacrificed to buy the Union enough time to secure the high ground that would ultimately win the battle. The cost was almost impossible to comprehend. The brigade suffered over 60% casualties. The 24th Michigan alone lost 363 men out of 496, the highest numerical loss of any Union regiment in the entire battle. Among those 363 was Corporal Andrew Wagner, Company F, 24th Michigan, 18 years old. He'd enlisted in August 1862, 11 months before Gettysburg. The regimental records note him as wounded in the Herbst Woods action. He survived, many didn't. But for every number in that casualty report, there's an Andrew Wagner, a boy with 11 months of service who walked into those woods a soldier. If he came out, he carried something he'd never put down. In one day, the Iron Brigade was broken. It would be reinforced and fight on, but it would never be the same. The unique spirit of the original Western regiments was gone lost in the slaughter of Herbst Woods. Confederate General A.P. Hill, whose troops had led the assault, reportedly said he had never known the Federals to fight so well. The Iron Brigade had marched into Gettysburg with a reputation of iron. They left behind a legacy paid for in blood. But according to local lore, the story doesn't end there. History gives us the facts, troop movements, casualty counts, strategic outcomes. But around places of great trauma and sacrifice, another kind of story takes root. It's a history whispered in stories, seen in shadows, and felt in a sudden chill on a summer evening. Gettysburg is arguably the most haunted place in America, and many of the tales are of soldiers who never left their posts. The story of the Iron Brigade at Gettysburg is more than military history. It's the story of men who marched into the heart of a storm, stood their ground against impossible odds, and paid a devastating price for a victory they wouldn't live to see. Their stand in Herbst Woods wasn't just a holding action. It was an act of sacrifice that changed the course of the most important battle of the Civil War. They bought the Union Army the time it needed, and they were all but erased for it. Yet they weren't forgotten. Their legacy is written in history books, carved into monuments, and if you believe the stories, whispered on the wind that rustles through the leaves of Herbst Woods. That hiker near Willoughby Run in 1994 never said he was frightened. What he remembered most, years later, was how calm the soldier looked, at ease, just a man leaning against an oak, going through the motions of loading a rifle he would never fire again, because the battle he's still fighting was never concluded with an order to stand down. He didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a man still waiting for the word. After what the Iron Brigade sacrificed on this ground, after Herbst Woods and the Color Guard and the last 14 and the road to Cemetery Hill, maybe the order never came. Maybe it never will. The Eternal Sentinel is still at his post. What part of the Iron Brigade's story stands out most to you? Have you ever visited Gettysburg and felt the weight of its history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to read them. And if this story moved you, hit the like button. It tells us you want more. Subscribe to The Dark Veil because next time we're stepping into the horrors of Shiloh. And we promise you, the dead there have just as much to say.